For 6 years, the boy hadn't made a single sound. Not a cry, not a laugh, not even the absent little hum children make when they're bored and staring out windows. Brennan Caruso was 8 years old and the heir to the most feared construction empire in New Orleans, and he communicated entirely through a small whiteboard he carried everywhere, the kind kindergartners used to practice the alphabet. His tutors wrote on it. He wrote back. They lasted on average 3 weeks before submitting their resignation by slipping a folded note under the study door so they wouldn't have to face his father. His father, Cole Caruso, was not a man you wanted to face with bad news. Petra Voss found out about the position the way most desperate people find out about things they probably shouldn't touch, through a whisper. A woman at the unemployment office, 2 seats down, leaning sideways and saying in a low voice, "You look like someone who needs a miracle. I heard the Carusos are hiring again." And then she'd laughed, like it was a joke, like the idea of working for Cole Caruso was something you'd only do if you'd run out of every other option. Petra had run out of every other option approximately 3 weeks ago. Her sister Wren was sick. Not the manageable kind of sick, not the kind where you take a pill and feel better in a week. It was the slow, grinding, expensive kind, the kind with specialist appointments and infusion treatments and a list of medications whose cost Petra had stopped writing down because the numbers made her hands shake. Wren was 23, and she still laughed at bad jokes, and she had a poster of the Eiffel Tower above her bed, even though she'd never been to France, and never was going to get there if her sister didn't figure something out fast. So Petra called the number. The agency that answered was clipped and professional, and gave her exactly one piece of advice. Do not ask Mr. Caruso personal questions. Do not initiate conversation unless he speaks to you first. And do not, under any circumstances, try to make the boy talk. That last one stayed with her on the drive over, because it was a strange thing to warn someone about. Don't try to make the boy talk, as though every person before her had tried, and every single one had failed. The Caruso house was not what she expected. She had been picturing something cold, marble and glass, the kind of house that photographs well and feels like nothing. What she found instead was a 3-story colonial on a street lined with live oaks, their branches draped in Spanish moss that ghosted in the October wind. The house was beautiful in a wounded way, like something that had been cared for obsessively, and then, all at once, not cared for at all. The flower beds were overgrown. One shutter hung at a slight angle. The front porch light flickered. The man who opened the door was not Cole Caruso. He was older, somewhere in his 60s, with a white shirt, and the kind of posture that came from decades of standing at attention. His name, he said, was Aldous, and he was the household demean. He was the person who kept the whole operation from collapsing between one crisis and the next. "Mr. Caruso will see you in 15 minutes, Aldous said. Do not be late." She wasn't late. She sat in the foyer on a wooden chair that was either an antique or just very old, and she looked around at the walls. There were no family photographs. There was a painting, a dark landscape, water and cypress trees. There was a console table with a brass lamp and a ceramic bowl holding nothing, and at the top of the curved staircase, barely visible behind the balusters, a small pale face looking down at her. Petra looked up. The boy looked back. He had dark eyes and dark circles under them, and he was wearing a school uniform that was slightly too big across the shoulders. He held the whiteboard against his chest like a shield. She raised her hand in a small wave. He disappeared. Cole Caruso's study smelled of coffee and blueprints. He was standing behind a drafting table when Petra was shown in, and he did not stop looking at the plan spread in front of him when she entered. She had time to observe him. Mid-30s, dark hair that needed cutting, a jaw set with the particular tension of a man who had made holding himself together into a full-time job. He wore a charcoal dress shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows. There was a small white scar on the back of his left hand. "Sit," he said without looking up. She sat. He turned a page on the drafts. Then he picked up a folder and held it out without walking to her, so she had to stand up and cross the room to take it. She did. "Petra Ann Voss," he said, returning to the drafts, 29, Ohio born. "You have a degree in early childhood education you haven't used. You left your last teaching position after 2 years, reason unstated. Your sister has an autoimmune condition that's been treated at Oxner for the past 8 months. You are $1,400 behind on the treatment co-pays." He still hadn't looked at her. "How did you?" "I run background checks," he said flatly. "Everyone who enters this house gets one. You should assume I know everything." Petra pressed her lips together. Then, "Why am I here? If you know everything about me, you already know if you want to hire me." He looked up then. His eyes were dark, the same color as his son's, and considerably less soft. "I'm here because I want to know one thing that's not in the file," he said. "Why did you leave the teaching position?" She held his gaze. "A student in my class had selective mutism. I modified my approach to work with him specifically: non-verbal cues, written communication, sign language basics. His parents felt I was giving him too much individual attention at the expense of other students. The school sided with the parents. Silence. You got fired for trying to help a quiet child. I resigned before they could fire me. Cole Caruso looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked back down at his drafts. The position pays $4,000 a week, he said. You will work Monday through Saturday. You will live in the East Wing. You will eat meals with Brennan. You will not discuss his mother. You will not discuss his inability to speak with anyone outside this house. And you will not, he paused, his voice dropping to something quieter and much more dangerous, push him. He has been pushed enough. Petra thought of the face at the top of the stairs. I understand, she said. Good. He picked up his coffee. You start Thursday. The first week with Brennan Caruso was unlike anything Petra had experienced in 3 years of teaching. He was not difficult in the way she had expected. He wasn't destructive, He wasn't destructive or volatile. He wasn't cruel, terrifyingly careful, in the way of someone who has learned that the world is unpredictable and the best response to unpredictability is stillness. He sat straight. He ate what was on his plate. He completed every assignment Petra gave him with neat, precise handwriting. When he needed to communicate, he wrote on the whiteboard in small, measured letters and held it up and waited. I already did this chapter. The dog outside is hurt. You don't have to pretend to like math. Nobody likes math. That last one made Petra press her hand to her mouth to hide the smile, and Brennan watched her do it, and something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but the shadow of one, like a word recalled in a language you'd half forgotten. She didn't push. She didn't talk about his silence or ask him to try or suggest that he might feel better if he just said one small thing. She simply taught him and ate lunch with him, and in the afternoons, when the weather was bearable, she took him into the back garden where the overgrown jasmine climbed the iron fence and the light came through the oaks in long golden shafts. It was in the garden at the end of the second week that she started singing. It wasn't intentional. She was deadheading the roses along the garden wall. Something Aldous had mentioned hadn't been done since spring, and she was humming to herself without thinking about it, a tune her grandmother used to sing on Sunday mornings in the kitchen of her house in rural Kentucky. An old shape-note hymn, low and modal and a little melancholy, the kind of melody that felt like it had been around long before anyone wrote it down. She heard a sound behind her. She turned. Brennan was standing very still on the garden path, the whiteboard hanging loose at his side, his face doing something complicated she couldn't name. He was staring at her. She stopped humming. He lifted the whiteboard. Where did you learn that? Petra blinked. My grandmother. She grew up singing it in church. Why? He erased. Rewrote. My mum used to hum it. When she thought nobody was listening, the garden went very quiet. A mockingbird said something sharp from the top of the fence. Petra crouched down so she was at his level. She had good taste, she said simply. Brennan stared at her for another moment. Then he sat down on the garden bench, opened his school notebook, and went back to his reading. But his shoulders, she noticed, had dropped a half-inch from where they'd been. She found out about Elena Caruso the way most people found things out in that house. By accident. It was a Saturday, and Cole was gone. He was always gone on Saturdays. Meetings that ran through the evening, a pattern Petra had noticed but not commented on. She was looking for a spare charger for Brennan's tablet, and she had opened the wrong drawer in the study, and there it was. A photograph, face down, the back labeled in someone else's handwriting. Elena and Brennan. August. She didn't flip it over. She closed the drawer. But that night, after Brennan was asleep, Aldous found her in the kitchen making tea and sat down without being asked, which was unusual enough that she knew he had something to say. She was a musician, Aldous said, wrapping both hands around a mug. Classical training, but she loved old American folk music. Shape-note singing, sacred harp. She had recordings she'd collected for years. She used to play them in the kitchen on Sunday mornings. He paused. She died 2 years ago. A car accident. Brennan was in the back seat. He was physically uninjured. He hasn't spoken since. Petra set down her mug. He was there. He watched his mother die, Aldous said, and his voice was careful the way old grief makes voices careful. The doctors say the silence is trauma response. They've had 3 therapists, 2 specialists from out of state, 1 from overseas. They've tried everything from EMDR to equine therapy. And Cole? Aldous looked at his tea. Mr. Caruso responds to problems, trying to solve them. When problems can't be solved, he withdraws. He loves the boy deeply. He simply doesn't know how to reach him. Petra thought about Cole at the drafting table, the sleeves rolled up, the scar on his hand, the way he'd said he has been pushed enough, like it was a thing he'd had to learn by watching it go wrong. Does he know about the connection? She asked. The music? Not yet, Aldous said. He met her eyes. I think you should tell him. She didn't get the chance right away, because everything came apart first. On a Tuesday, 3 weeks into her time at the Caruso house, Petra received a call from Wren's treatment center. The latest round of labs had come back flagged. The attending physician was recommending an accelerated course of infusion therapy. 6 weeks, twice a week, at a cost that made Petra go to the bathroom and sit on the floor of it for 10 minutes with the door locked. She couldn't let Wren see her cry. Wren, who laughed at bad jokes and had the Eiffel Tower poster and always pretended everything was fine so that Petra wouldn't worry. She pulled herself together and went back to the kitchen table and told Wren it would be okay. Then she went to bed and stared at the ceiling. She hadn't realized she'd been doing that quietly enough to go unnoticed until the next morning, when Cole Caruso appeared in the doorway of the schoolroom while she was setting out Brennan's morning work and said, without preamble, "You look like someone who didn't sleep." "I slept fine," she said. "You didn't." He leaned against the doorframe. He had the look of a man who had also not slept. "Aldous mentioned your sister had an appointment." She turned to face him. Aldous has a generous definition of what's his to mention. He was worried. Cole looked at her with that dark, assessing gaze. "What's the situation?" "It's my situation. You work in my house. That makes it relevant to me." "It really doesn't," Petra said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. Cole Caruso looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked over her shoulder at Brennan, who had arrived silently in the way he always did, and was standing at his desk with his whiteboard. "Later," Cole said, and left. Later came at 6 o'clock when Brennan was upstairs, and the house had settled into its evening quiet. Cole appeared in the kitchen with 2 cups of coffee and put one in front of her without asking. "Tell me about your sister," he said. She told him, the whole of it, the diagnosis, the treatments, the timeline, the gap between what insurance covered and what the bills actually said. She told him about the Eiffel Tower poster and the bad jokes, and the way Wren had never once, not once, asked Petra to slow down her own life to take care of her. Cole listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "I'll have the shortfall handled by end of week," he said. Petra stared at him. "Excuse me." "The difference between the insurance coverage and the actual cost. I'll have it handled. You can't just—" "I can and I will," he said. His voice wasn't unkind, but it left no room for argument. "You are an employee of mine, and your sister's health affects your ability to do your job, and I take care of what falls under my responsibility. This is not a favor. It's a business decision." He paused. Then, quieter, "I've watched someone I care about not get help in time. I'm not willing to watch it happen to someone else." She understood suddenly that he wasn't talking about Brennan. She didn't know what to say. She'd been managing alone for so long that someone simply deciding to help felt like a hand reaching down a well she'd gotten used to the bottom of. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once, picked up his coffee, and then, before he left the kitchen, he stopped. "Why does my son come alive in the garden?" he asked without turning around. "He's been out there every afternoon this week." Aldous said he started pulling weeds. Petra took a breath. "Can I show you something? Tomorrow morning, before Brennan's up?" He turned his head just slightly. 7 o'clock. She played him the recording on her phone. It was a simple field recording she'd found online, a sacred harp singing session from rural Alabama, a congregation gathered in a wooden church, the voices rising in that strange ancient parallel harmony, the same melodic mode as her grandmother's hymn, the same melodic mode as whatever Elena Caruso had hummed in the kitchen on Sunday mornings. Cole sat at the kitchen table and listened with his hands flat on the surface and his eyes somewhere far away. When the recording ended, he didn't say anything for a long moment. "He heard you singing it," Cole said. "It wasn't a question, in the garden." "Yes, and he—" Cole stopped. His jaw worked. He responded. "He told me his mother used to hum it." She paused. "On the whiteboard." He wrote it on the whiteboard. Cole Caruso put his face in his hands. It lasted only a second. Then he straightened, pressed his palms flat on the table, and was the controlled, armored version of himself again. But Petra had seen what was underneath. "Does he know that you know about her?" Cole asked. "No, good. Don't tell him. Let him choose what to share and when." He stood up, "But keep singing." She should have seen it coming, she thought later. She had been too focused on Brennan, on the slow, careful thing that was beginning to grow in those afternoon garden hours. The way he'd started leaving small objects on her desk with explanation, a smooth river stone, a folded piece of paper with a drawing of the mockingbird, a torn-out page from a book with one line underlined. Every lock has a key that hasn't been found yet. She was too focused on that to notice the other thing building, until it arrived on a Wednesday night in the form of a man she'd never seen before. He appeared at the service entrance at 8 in the evening, past when any delivery would arrive, past when the staff were around. Petra heard the knock from the hallway and went to check because Aldous had left early for a doctor's appointment of his own. She opened the service door and found a heavy-set man in a pale linen suit, smiling in a way that didn't involve his eyes. "Miss Voss?" he said. My name is Dennis Farr. I represent some business interests that have a concern about the Caruso estate. He reached into his jacket. I have something that belongs to you. He held up her sister's hospital intake form, with Wren's home address printed clearly at the top. Petra's blood went cold. I found it in the mail, he said pleasantly. Must have been misdelivered. Fragile thing, a sick girl, all alone in an apartment. Terrible neighborhood. He tilted his head. But I imagine you could fix that, couldn't you? One unlocked gate is all it takes. Mr. Caruso has something we need from his office. You give us 20 minutes inside, we give you your sister's privacy back. Simple. You need to leave, Petra said. Her voice came out steady. She didn't know how. Miss Voss, if you contact me again, I will go directly to Mr. Caruso, she said. And then you will have a problem that has nothing to do with the gate. She closed the door, locked it, stood with her back against it for 3 full minutes. Then she went upstairs, checked that Brennan's room was dark and quiet, and called Wren. Hey, is everything okay? I need you to go to Aunt Carol's tonight, Petra said. Just tonight. Tell her it's a visit. Petra, please, a pause. Okay, she hung up. Then she went to Cole Caruso's study and knocked. He was still up at the drafting table, where she suspected he always was. She told him all of it. The man at the door, the hospital form, the offer. She kept her voice flat and her hands still, and she watched his expression as she spoke. The way it didn't change exactly, but seemed to solidify, like cooling metal. When she finished, he said, Which suit? Pale linen. Yes. Dennis Farr. Cole said the name with the specific quietness of someone who had been waiting for it to become relevant. He works for a developer named Hugh Grantham. They've been trying to push me off a contract in the warehouse district for 8 months. I assumed it was just litigation. He stood up. He followed you from your sister's treatment center, Cole said, which means he had someone watching you before you were hired. His voice was very controlled. They knew you needed money. They were waiting for an opportunity. Petra felt the floor shift slightly. They intended to use me from the beginning, possibly, or they saw an opportunity and adapted. He looked at her. Either way, you came to me immediately. You didn't open the gate. Of course I didn't open the gate, I know, he said, and the 2 words held something that wasn't quite gratitude, but was heavier than relief. Your sister, she's somewhere safe? My aunt's. Good. I'll have 2 of my people outside the building by morning. He picked up his phone. Go to sleep, Petra. I'll handle Grantham. How? Cole looked at her. For the first time, she saw the thing that everyone who worked with him must have eventually seen. The thing underneath the control. The thing that made unions comply and contractors fall in line, and rivals in the warehouse district back down. It wasn't cruelty, it was certainty. The kind of certainty that comes from having already decided exactly how far you're willing to go and being entirely comfortable with the answer. The way I handle everything, he said, completely. The next 48 hours were very quiet in the way that pressure systems before storms are quiet. Petra stayed close to Brennan. She was outwardly calm, the way she'd learned to be calm in front of students when things were wrong. Teaching was good practice for presenting a normal surface while internal weather raged. They worked through his history lessons, built a small model of a Creole cottage out of cardboard and paint, ate lunch on the garden bench in the mild November air. Brennan, who noticed everything, watched her. On the second afternoon, he held up the whiteboard. Are you scared? Petra looked at him. A little. He erased. Of what? She thought about how to answer that honestly without explaining the Grantham situation to an 8-year-old. Of not being able to protect the people I love, she said. Sometimes things happen that are outside our control and it's frightening. He held her gaze for a long time. Then he erased the board and wrote something and held it up and looked away at the garden while she read it. After the accident, I thought if I didn't make any noise, nothing else bad could find us. Like being invisible, Petra sat very still. Did it work? She asked quietly. He shook his head. His jaw was tight in the exact same way his father's was when something was costing him. The bad things already knew where you were, she said. Being silent didn't protect anyone, it just kept you alone with it. He looked at her. His dark eyes were too old for his face. She reached over and tugged the brim of his cap gently. You are not invisible to me, she said. You never were. He looked down at the whiteboard. He didn't write anything else. But at dinner that night, when Cole came home earlier than usual and sat at the table across from his son and asked how the history lesson had gone, Brennan didn't reach for the whiteboard right away. He sat with his hands in his lap and his mouth working slightly, like someone testing the weight of something they'd been setting down for a very long time. Cole noticed. He went perfectly still. He didn't lean forward or widen his eyes or do anything that might shatter the moment. He simply waited, the way Petra had watched him wait for contracts to close and rivals to flinch. We built, Brennan said. His voice was rough and small and not quite even, like a door opening that had been shut for years, a cottage. The kitchen was absolutely silent. Cole Caruso set down his fork. He looked at his son. His face did something complicated and private that Petra looked away from, because it wasn't for her. "Tell me about it," Cole said, his own voice not entirely steady. And Brennan did. Dennis Farr was arrested on Friday for extortion and witness tampering, charges that Cole's legal team had apparently been assembling with quiet efficiency for the past 2 days. Hugh Grantham's development firm lost its bid on the warehouse district contract on Monday, for reasons that were technically procedural and practically devastating. Petra did not ask for details. She understood enough. Wren came home from their aunt's on Saturday. Her next infusion cycle was scheduled for the following week, the copay question resolved. When Petra called to check on the billing, the woman on the phone told her the account had a 0 balance. "Zero?" Petra said. "Yes, ma'am. Paid in full." Cole was in the garden with Brennan when she found him. They were crouched over something at the base of the jasmine fence. Brennan was pointing at a small brown spider and saying something in the new voice, still rough at the edges, still careful but his. Cole was listening with the focused attention of someone experiencing a thing they weren't sure they deserved. She stood back for a moment and let them have it. Then Cole looked up and saw her, and she said, "The billing office said 0 balance." "Good," he said. "You said you'd cover the shortfall, not the whole." "I said I'd have it handled," he said. "It's handled." She looked at him across the garden, this man who held himself like someone prepared at all times for impact, who kept his study lit until midnight and had a photograph face down in his drawer, and had apparently loved someone who hummed old hymns in a kitchen on Sunday mornings. "Cole," she said. It was the first time she'd used his given name. She watched something in his expression register it. "Thank you." He held her gaze for a moment. "Come to dinner on Sunday," he said. "Bring your sister. Brennan has been asking about her." "You told him about Wren?" "He asked why you looked worried," Cole said simply. "I told him the truth. He said he wanted to meet her because anyone who could make you look that worried must be someone worth knowing." Petra laughed. It surprised her, the laugh, the way it came out clean and real, without the thin edge of management she'd gotten used to putting on everything. "Okay," she said Sunday. 6 months later, the Caruso garden was a different place. The jasmine had been properly trained up the iron fence. The roses were pruned and blooming in a deep, particular red. Someone, Brennan, as it turned out, who had developed a passionate and extremely specific interest in horticultures, had planted a row of sweet olive along the back wall whose scent drifted through the open windows in the evenings. On Sunday mornings, there was music, not recorded, not formal, just Petra at the kitchen island with her coffee, humming without thinking about it, the way her grandmother used to, and Brennan at the table with his notebook, occasionally humming along in that new rough voice that had grown, over 6 months, into something stronger and clearer, and Cole in the doorway between the hall and the kitchen, a mug in his hand, not quite in the room, but not quite out of it either, in the way of a man who has learned that happiness is something you approach carefully, from the side, so you don't startle it. There was no dramatic declaration. There was no moment where everything was summed up neatly and the story was finished. There was just a Sunday morning. The smell of sweet olive through the open window. A boy humming a hymn his mother used to love. A man letting himself be in a room where it played. And a woman who had walked into a wounded house with holes in her shoes and a desperate need and had discovered that healing is rarely loud. That sometimes the most powerful thing in the world is simply a melody, familiar and low, that reminds something broken that it remembers what whole felt like. Petra hummed the old hymn. The river runs. The setting sun. And everyone in the Caruso house let themselves breathe.